This is my personal experience with something that still haunts me to this day. What I found in that old archive changed my life forever, and I can no longer keep it to myself. You might think it's just a story, but trust me, it's far from fiction. What you're about to hear is real, and if you're brave enough to continue, just know that there's no turning back once you start listening. The things in that archive, they won't just stay in the past. I didn't mean to go there. The old library wasn't a place I frequented, not since I was a kid. It was tucked away on a forgotten street, the kind of place where the dust seemed to hang in there, suspended in time. But on that particular day, something drew me in, something beyond my control. The librarian, an elderly woman with silver hair tied in a tight bun, barely looked up as I entered. Her eyes were hidden behind thick glasses, and she seemed more interested in the ancient tome she was reading than in me. The smell of old paper and leather filled my lungs, a scent I hadn't realized I missed until that moment. I wandered through the aisles, fingers brushing against the spines of books that looked like they hadn't been touched in decades. Then, almost as if it called to me, I found it, an unremarkable book, bound in cracked leather with no title on the cover. It was wedged between two larger volumes, as if it had been hidden there intentionally. As I pulled the book free, a chill ran down my spine. I opened it, expecting to find the yellowed pages of an old novel, but what I found was something else entirely. The pages were blank, or at least, they appeared to be at first, but as I turned the pages, faint words began to emerge, as if written in some invisible ink. The words were old, archaic, but I could read them. They told stories, each more bizarre and unsettling than the last, tales of ancient rituals, lost civilizations, and creatures that lurked in the shadows between worlds. I couldn't stop reading. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. I lost all sense of time. Then, I reached a page that was different from the others. The ink was darker, fresher, and the words seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The story on this page wasn't about ancient times or distant places. It was about me. The more I read, the more I realized that this wasn't just a story. It was my life, my memories, my thoughts, written down on these pages. But it didn't stop at the present. The book began to tell me things I hadn't done yet, things I hadn't even thought about, and that's when the real horror began. Suddenly, the room grew colder, the lights flickered, and I heard a whisper, soft and almost imperceptible, like the rustle of pages turning in the wind. I looked around, but I was alone, or at least, I thought I was. I tried to close the book, but it wouldn't shut. The pages flipped back to that story, the one about me, and then, the events in the book started to happen in real life. At first, it was small things. I would read about a phone ringing, and then it would ring, or I'd read about a sudden gust of wind, and the windows would rattle. But then, the book began to describe things that were impossible, things that couldn't happen, and yet, they did. I remember reading about a shadow in the corner of the room, just behind me. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and I turned around, but there was nothing there, or at least, nothing I could see, but I could feel it, watching me, waiting. The book spoke of voices, soft at first, then louder, more insistent. They weren't just in the book anymore. They were in my head, whispering things I didn't want to hear, things I couldn't understand. I tried to leave the library, to put the book back where I found it, but the doors wouldn't open. The librarian was gone, and the aisles seemed to stretch on forever, twisting and turning in ways that defied logic. No matter which direction I walked, I always ended up back where I started, in front of that cursed book. I don't know how long I was trapped in that library, but it felt like days, maybe weeks. The stories in the book grew darker, more terrifying. I read about creatures that lived in the shadows, waiting for their chance to slip into our world. I read about people who had found the book before me, and what had happened to them. None of the stories ended well. Then, the book began to tell me how my story would end. It described in detail how the shadows would close in, how I would lose my mind, how I would never escape that cursed place. But I refused to accept it. I fought against the book, against the fate it was trying to write for me. Finally, in a moment of clarity, I realized that the book was feeding off my fear. The more terrified I became, the stronger it grew. I had to calm down, to think rationally. I couldn't let the book control me. I tore out the pages, one by one, until there was nothing left but the empty cover. The shadows receded, the whispers faded, and the light stopped flickering. The library was just a library again, dusty and forgotten. But I wasn't the same. The book might have been destroyed, but the things it showed me, the things it made me see, they stayed with me. I could still hear the whisper sometimes, especially at night when the house was quiet and the shadows were long. I left the library that day, but I knew I would never truly leave it behind. The book had been a gateway, a way for something from another world to reach out and touch ours, and I had opened that gateway, even if only for a moment. Now, I live with the knowledge that there are things out there, things we can't see, things we can't understand, and they're always watching, waiting for someone else to open the door. I don't know what happened to the library after I left. I never went back, and I never want to, but sometimes I wonder if the book is still there, waiting for the next person to find it, to read its pages, and to unleash the horrors trapped within. So, if you ever find yourself in an old library, browsing the shelves for something to read, be careful. Some books are better left unopened, and if you ever come across a book with no title, bound in cracked leather, walk away, because once you open it, you might not be able to close it again, and the things you read, they might just come true.